Welcome to Forward with Truth. We're here. I'm your host, Nathan Anderson, and today we have a very special guest from Lancaster Hope Chapel, Pastor...
Lancaster, California.
Lancaster, California. We're not Lancaster, England. We're Lancaster, California, with my good friend, Pastor Sean Appleton. And just to let you in a wee secret, Sean actually married me. Not in that way. He presided over our blessing with my wife in California. So it's really good to see you again, brother. And before we dive into today's conversation, I'd really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, and share, and support the channel that way. So as it just helps us reach more people with these important conversations. So Pastor Sean is known for his commitment to faithfulness, passion for serving his immediate community, dedication to strengthening marriages and families, and his concern for the poor. So today we're going to dive into his journey of faith, the challenges of ministering in a high poverty area, and his thoughts on giving generously, earning wisely, and also giving, and also being wise with money. So, Pastor Sean, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Nathan. I mean, we've known this was coming. I was looking forward to it, and I'm so happy you're doing this.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. Well, look, it's a pleasure for me, to be honest with you, Sean. So let's start from the beginning. Sean, you weren't raised in a Christian home.
No.
And you were the first in your family to come to faith. So can you share us your story of how you came to faith?
Yeah. So, I mean, we attended with, my parents were divorced when I was 7 years old. And at that time, I was going through to the Catholic Church.
Yeah. Went
through catechism, Holy Communion. And then my parents got divorced. And at that point, my mom was excommunicated from the church, so I stopped going. Okay. So my faith journey took a hiatus, and then I was 17 years old when I came to faith in Christ. I was a senior in high school, and it was just God setting up the aspects of all the little details in my life to make that happen. And my life has been amazing change ever since then. Yeah.
So, what was the biggest challenge you faced then as first being a believer in your family?
That's a good question. I had a heart for my family to be saved, and I remember my pastor. He would tell me, we're going to be believing for your whole family, and I thought that's going to take a miracle.
Yeah.
and slowly but surely, I began to read the scriptures, in the Word that talk about whole families getting saved, and the promises of salvation, and how important that was. And so, one at a time, I was able to lead all my family members to Christ.
Yeah. So every one of them.
Every one of them.
And they're still going on.
My two sisters, who are both still alive.
Wow.
And my mom and dad, who are both passed. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how did you be a missionary in your family? That's a really interesting thing to hear.
Well, my family was pretty broken, so I knew they needed saving.
Yeah.
They weren't just going to get there because they were good.
Yeah.
They were broken and lost. And both my mom and dad struggled with alcohol and drug addictions. I tell people my mom was a certified hippie, for straight out of the 60s. And with everything that includes that, she was a hippie lady, super loving, but absolutely no boundaries. And I just loved my family. I did witness to them, but I think it was my life that I allowed to be a witness, and I loved them and prayed for them. I'll tell you a quick story about the first person in my family who got saved was my younger sister, and I prayed for her every day for a year. And she was a beach girl. We lived in San Diego at the time, and party girl, just whatever was a party. She had an older boyfriend who stayed in the house, with where she lived with my mom. My mom allowed the boyfriend to live in the house, and my sister's in high school.
Okay.
That's how.
No boundaries?
No boundaries. And so I began to pray, and a year later, I visited my sister.
Yeah.
I had just gotten out of high school, and I asked my sister to go to church with me. She said, okay, but we're going to sit in the back.
Okay.
So we sat against the back wall, against the wall, as far as you could get from the preacher, right? As far as you could possibly get. Well, my pastor gave a great message that day, and he had an altar call, and he said, does anyone like to receive the Lord? And my sister raised her hand, and he said something to my sister that kind of shocked me. He said, that young man who's sitting right next to you is going to tell you all about Jesus. That was his follow-up.
Right, okay.
It was follow-up. I was going to be the one to disciple my little sister, and I was. Mm-hmm. I got a chance to, and now she and her husband are youth pastors with the Calvary Chapel Church.
Oh, wow.
And they've been for 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, good stuff.
That's, I'm sure you look back and you go, what a joy. What a joy.
Yeah.
Because, I know a lot of people who come to faith and they never see any of their family ever come to faith.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just one or two. That is an amazing story. So, how did your journey in faith after you came to faith? How did that take you then into ministry?
I always knew that I wanted to learn more about God. I graduating high school, I wanted to be an engineer. And so I thought, I went to junior college for a year, and then I thought, well, maybe I want to go to Bible college for a couple years to learn the Bible, and then I'll have it with me. I'll have that knowledge with me for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And so I had gone to Bible college for 2 years, and my mother's brother, who was an engineer, which he was a father figure in my life, a good man. He called me and said, "Are you ready to start, going to school and to, become an engineer?" And I said, "I don't think so." And he said, "Well, if you want to, I'll pay your way to go to UCLA." I'm like, I had to think about it for a minute. And I said, no, this is the choice. After 2 years in Bible college, I realized there was a call in my life.
Yeah.
So I just continued and finished Bible college, found my wife there. She was a student. We graduated from Bible college in 1989,
wow,
100 years ago, and came here to Lancaster.
Yeah.
Or as you say, Lancaster.
Yes. Well, I'm sure now looking back, you sort of go, it was definitely worth it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have got my wife.
Oh, best thing ever.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what was the moment though that you knew this was your calling? What was that moment like?
I think it was a series of small moments. I knew that I was called to be a follower of God, initially, that I was going to serve Him. Mm-hmm. But it was during my first official ministry opportunity was teaching 5th and 6th grade children in the inner city in Los Angeles at a church Sunday school. And so challenging, inner city kids, they were pretty rough, and I'm alone with 25 inner city kids, and they're really, it's hard on me, They're rambunctious. They're a little out of control.
You're a beach guy, and you're.
I was easy going, and these inner city kids are just chewing me up, and no mercy. But over the next couple years, I was able to develop relationship and see lives changed, and it was that impact. I'll tell you another odd story. One of the kids that I this is almost 40 years ago now.
Yeah.
I was his Sunday school teacher. Now he moved up here to Lancaster, which is about an hour north of Los Angeles. Yeah. He moved up here a few years ago. Now he attends our church, and him and his wife and his daughter, and his father also attends our church.
Whoa.
His father was one of the parents that I called as a Sunday school teacher, said, can you come help me? And he said yes. And so he helped me with the class. I got a lot better with another adult. And now he's a missionary that we help support from our congregation. So it's a beautiful story. A lot of signs, I think, in the calling with your life. And for us, it was just a confirmation after confirmation.
Yeah, and I suppose it's you just saw the gift that God had given you, and God just led you there, and like to the level that when your Sunday school kids are coming to your church, that's really a good sign.
And I found out that being a pastor is not just being a pastor of adults.
Yeah,
it's being a pastor of people. One of my favorite jobs was being a children's pastor.
Yeah.
When my first job here at this church was as a children's pastor. Yeah. So and youth pastor for 8 years Kay and I did that, and it wasn't second class ministry. It was very fulfilling, satisfying.
Yeah. So how did you end up in Hope Chapel then?
Well, so we were at the Bible college getting ready to graduate, and we're looking at different opportunities. And there was a teacher at the Bible college. His name was Dan Stewart. And I worked at the college. I was the janitor at the college. And I used to take out his trash. I never had a class with Dan as a teacher. But he called me up one night and said, hey, would you guys be interested in coming to our church and helping us with children and other things at a smaller church at the time? And Kay and I had been praying already. We'd already been fasting, and it was odd because he called and asked at 9 o'clock at night. I put the phone down. He said, would you be willing to come? I put the phone down. I leaned over to Kay. I said, Kay, it's Dan. He wants to know if we'd like to come help him at his church. And she nodded, and I nodded. And I said, yeah, we'll come. No, I didn't even know if it was a paying job. I didn't even know where Lancaster was.
Yes.
I had never been to Lancaster. So it was the Lord just, setting us up. It was a confirmation by the Spirit just saying, this is your path. And I wasn't planning on it, but we've been here 36 years.
You stayed?
That wasn't my plan.
Yeah.
4 more. I think that's it, right?
Yeah.
You do your time.
Well, you never know. There's, the Queen, the late Queen. She did 60 years.
Yeah. Well, she's better.
Sorry, 70.
She's better than me.
Well, look. So, but first of all, thanks so much. I should have said as well. Here we are in Hope Chapel itself, so we've got a lovely bookcase here, and thank you so much for allowing this to be the place for the podcast today. So, but Lancaster is a unique place. It was a small town, and then has become a really, really big city.
Yeah.
A relatively big city, but it's got deep challenges now. So I'm just going to read out some of the issues here that have happened, because it's moved from small town to big town to area of real deep poverty. So 15.5% live below the poverty line, and that's higher than California's 12%. Child poverty sits at 22.5%, and that's compared to the state's 14.6%. Unemployment sits around 9.8%, and that's well above the national average. Only 24.4% have a bachelor's degree or higher, and that's again versus California's, which sits at about 37.5%. 67.1% of those are in poverty are renters. The median rent is £1,100 per month, and that's the median. And commutes average between 37 minutes, which is again much longer than the national norm. So given those realities, and remember, what challenges does pastoring in this context bring?
I think, you mentioned the unemployment rate. Actually, it's much higher than that, because that's only the people that are on the rolls for unemployment that are receiving unemployment benefits.
Okay.
So realistically, it's probably over 15%.
15.
People have just they stopped getting their benefits, so they're not being counted anymore. It's when we have a unique economic area here, and because it's aerospace, and there's Edwards Air Force Base, it's a military complex that's close by. It really depends on the economy of the military. It sets the tone for our community. So if there are new projects they're working on, if the government is increasing the size or decreasing the size of the military, it makes a difference, a big difference in this place. So if like years ago there was a recession, 2009 I believe, big recession. Well, here it was a depression.
Yeah.
It was terrible. Houses for sale on every street. So there's swings in the market that affect us, and that is a challenge. It's a huge challenge.
So how do you find then pastoring in that? How do you deal with those challenges?
So it's interesting. I remember when I was youth pastor, we figured we had like 3 years with the kids, before they were off to the next age group. So we had to look at pastoring in like a 3-year. We want to impart some things in 3 years.
Yeah.
I'm feeling that same way about adults now. The average family in California moves every 3 years.
Okay.
Now, they might be across town, but it could be out of state. And we've had a lot of people move out of state from in this community. So I look at it in a shorter time frame. I might not have decades to watch them be discipled.
Yeah.
I might just have a few years.
Right. So you're then programming, even in terms of your teaching. How do I give them the basics of a Christian life? And that's sort of the way forward. So what are some misconceptions people might have about ministry in a place like Lancaster?
Well, it's a mixed bag ministry. I would say the large majority of people who are ministering in Lancaster are bivocational.
Yeah.
The large majority. I don't know what percentage, but I'd say 70-80% of the pastors. So it's very taxing. And then I've been able to be a full-time pastor here, not having to be bivocational. It's still difficult because it's kind of a moving target. You get new people in on a regular basis. You're wanting to develop ministries that people are coming in and out quite a bit, and that's a challenge.
Yeah, so you're saying that even the poverty level, in a sense, has created a situation where most pastors have to, because, or even not even just the poverty level, the costs. I mean, that pastors have to say, right, I'm working, but I'm working shepherding my flock, but I'm also working to feed my family. How does the Bible then shape your view of the poor? I remember when I'd sort of said to you about the podcast, and you said, look, the one thing that you really wanted to speak on was the whole issue of God's heart for the poor, and also poverty. So what are God's thoughts towards those in hardship?
Let me back up a little bit, because even when I was a child, I remember we grew up with economic hardships. We were on welfare.
Sure.
My mom was raising 3 kids, with some child support, but we were still poor. I don't know how it is in Ireland, but in California, they have their welfare was you could get government kind of sponsored foods, like government cheese and government peanut butter and freeze-dried milk and stuff like. So we grew up with that.
Yeah.
And I remember going to churches with my mom, mostly Catholic churches, because that was her background, and we would go to get bags of groceries.
Okay.
And she would take me with her. I don't know why. Maybe she didn't want to go alone. But I was just a young teenager. And I remember that distinctly, the experience of the church helping the poor. And I've just had a heart for it since then.
Yeah.
Then when we got here, the economic realities are that people have to make choices. I don't think in your statistics, we didn't talk about homelessness, but homelessness is a growing problem because people can't afford the rent. They can have even a job, kind of a minimum wage job, and not be able to afford the rent. And if they don't have family members to move in with, then they'll find themselves living in a car or going couch to couch, we call it couch surfing. So
it's a hidden homelessness, isn't it? Because everyone sees the people outside who are on the street. That's an obvious homelessness, but this is a homelessness where people are working, they're not in addiction, and they're really dependent on living from other people.
The numbers are really astonishing. They're not official numbers because when they do official numbers, they just count people living in tents in the desert, and that's about 4,000. But our estimates are that there are close to 10,000 people in a community of 500,000. About 10,000 that are homeless. So there's that struggle. And then you have senior citizens who are making choices. Do I pay for food or medicine or my utility bills? So they're being crunched. The economic realities are affecting them. So a big part of that is, I think, from the church, from the biblical standpoint, at least for me, the biblical standpoint is that this is, like practical aspects of religion. In James, it talks about helping orphans and widows in their distress. And when people are in distress, then I believe that's where the church steps in and fills a gap. Not only fills a gap for need, but also reaches people when they're at that point of need with good news as well. People are open, to the good news of the gospel when they're down on their luck, so to speak, or facing a crisis.
It focuses the mind, doesn't it? It focuses, because I think we've all had that experience too, when you've spoken to people and people say, no, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God, and then something bad happens in their life and then they're the first on their knees. Now, I'm not saying not everyone, that there are atheists out there who they are consistent right to the end and they say, no, I don't want God in my life, but there are those who are sort of agnostic nones, and then all of a sudden trouble comes and God can use that. God can use that to bring them to faith. So how does Hope Chapel then practically reach out to the community?
So we've done a few things. The big thing is our food ministry, and it's something that we started with. There was a family 30 years ago that started a food ministry in their garage. So they would, people in our congregation would donate canned items, and then they would store those in their garage. And when we got a phone call, we'd say, hey, so-and-so needs some groceries, and they would put it in their car and drive it to them. We individually, that's how we started it. And that same family has just took the next step about 25 years ago when we decided we got a trailer here on the site, and we started picking up day-old groceries from the supermarkets and then the local food bank in Los Angeles. So that expanded, huge. We were feeding, 50 people a week when we started doing that.
So it was sort of like an emergency food larder then? That's how it started?
Yeah. And then it just grew. It grew to the point where we had so many people waiting in line that we put them in the church sanctuary, because we didn't want people to wait outside, standing outside for 3 hours waiting for food. There were hundreds in line. So when was this? This is about 6 years ago.
6 years ago. So this is just before
COVID. Now, COVID changed how we did it, and it actually turned out good. So when COVID happened, we decided to make our our ministry a drive-through ministry. So we would put bags of groceries and we try to do, more than canned items. We do frozen, items, meats, vegetables, fruits, some fresh eggs, even like toilet paper. So we'll do several boxes worth of food and grocery items for each car, and there'll be usually about 250 cars that come through. And we do that twice a month. And then a couple other times a month we go to a local retirement community where we make it available to those folks. And there's about 60 or 70 of those folks that we help with groceries.
Brilliant. You're also, if I'm correct in saying as well, you're doing a sponsored walk this Saturday.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we can't because we'll be flying away on Saturday. But believe it or not, but what's that about then?
There's a local ministry called Grace Resources. Yeah. And that was started by a group of churches back in 1990. Just a year after we got to the community. And it's a beautiful ministry that all the churches help and support and sponsor, and they're part of it. So that's a ministry we're involved in. In fact, I'm on the board of that organization. Yeah. But they're doing a walk to raise funds and awareness of their ministry in the community. So it's going to be a beautiful day. It's going to be perfect weather, by the way. 80 degrees. How many is that Celsius?
That's the maximum that we've ever had in Northern Ireland, I can tell you.
It's a mild day here in the desert.
We'd be sweltering, as we would say.
And that's a great thing. Grace Resources has served in different ways. They actually ran a shelter for about 5 years. They got out of the shelter business, and the county actually wanted to support that effort. So the County of Los Angeles is helping support a local shelter. But Grace Resources helps with not just food, but also resourcing whatever needs you have, whether it's a mental health issue or it's they help like domestic family issues where they need a safe place for families to meet, like husbands and wives that are separated, to meet with their kids. So they're providing that for the community. They're just amazing. Hot meals about four nights a week as well. So it's churches in the area that have come together to pool resources, pool experience and expertise to say, look, there's more than just food that we can offer. We can offer wider family support, and not just family support, just counselling support. Yeah. And I'm sure that then is an opportunity as well to give them the greatest support that they could ever have, which is Jesus. Yeah. I think that the key is, we have a saying at the church about our food ministry. We tell them that the food ministry, it's not about the food.
Yeah.
It's really about people. And what we found is we're developing a relationship with people over time, and we have some of the same, folks that come for food. Yeah. But one unique thing that we get to do, and it's all volunteer, but as people are lining up around our parking lot and waiting a half mile down the road, really the line is a half mile long. When they come, before they get their food, we have a team of folks that will pray for each family in the cars, and English and in Spanish, because we have a bunch of Spanish folks, Spanish speakers. And that has been a beautiful element where we see not only people, touched by God, but we've seen some physical healings, some salvations. We've seen people join our congregation because how God met them as we prayed for them in their car. So that's the full circle of it. That's the best.
Well, here I'm gonna throw a wee question at you that maybe there's a lot of people say churches shouldn't be doing this. Churches should be just doing the gospel. What would you say to somebody who sort of comes with that approach?
Yeah, I mentioned the book of James earlier, faith and works work together.
Yeah.
And so it's the works that are the witness of our faith. We've had people come in our congregation, and I asked them, they're visiting, why did you visit? Do you know anyone? And they would say things like, no, but every week we see these huge lines of people in your parking lot. We wanted to see what was going on. And they found out it was a food ministry. Yeah. But I feel like it's part of our heritage and our history that we care.
Yes. And
that caring part is, we're helping the poor because that's the prominent need in our community.
Yeah.
I talked to a pastor in Nigeria a few years ago, and I was asking him, he was visiting the States, I was asking him what his church does and what kind of ministries, and he says, we help refugees. And I'm like, well, how many refugees? And he said, well, there's in northern Nigeria, Boko Haram is creating all kinds of havoc for Christians, and so they're fleeing to the south. He said in his city there are 50,000 refugees.
Wow.
There's a refugee camp. So their ministry is to refugees. I think for us, we disciple and we train and we have classes and small groups and opportunities for missions and all kinds of different activities. But our biggest outreach is for the poor, because it is the biggest need in our community.
Yeah. And in that sense, then you're taking on what the Lord says, this shall men know that you're my disciples, that you love one another. So there's a love within the church, but there's also a love that stretches beyond the church, which is to the sort of wider community.
Yeah.
And through that, you then use that as a platform to reach the immediate community.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, how do you do evangelism in the context of addiction, homelessness, and broken homes? Because there's a lot of family breakdown in this area. There's also a lot of homelessness, as you've sort of said, both the visual for 4,000 people in the desert, the 10,000 who are going. So how do you do evangelism in that context?
There's people in our congregation that actually go to the desert and they fix meals and they just drive out to the desert and love people. They pray for them and ask them if they can be a resource. So that has been an ongoing thing. We are involved with Grace Resources. We do a meal, one of the hot meals every month. And so we'll serve typically about 150 people a hot meal, where we also get a chance to talk with them and pray with them, some of them, if they want to, and be a consistent witness, for Christ to those vulnerable, the most vulnerable. I think, the domestic violence is also part of that, which is a part of the poverty cycle. And because of that, it's a large problem in our community. Spousal abuse, domestic violence, and they end up going to court, people going to court, and they get mandated to take anger management classes, which we provide for free. We're one of the very few ones in the community that does it for free. We do it because we want to reach those who are unable, they're already down and out. They're unable to pay $25 or $35 a session for an anger management class. Instead, they'll come here. Now, there's a really beauty about this, because since we don't charge, we can use whatever curriculum we want.
Okay.
So we just teach the Bible in our anger management classes. And the parole officers, they like it so much, they don't say anything, because we don't use a typical curriculum that they offer. But they like the results, and their people are not going back into any kind of criminal or domestic violence problems. So they're seeing.
So you're
change.
seeing real change in people.
Yeah.
And it's funny, because I think sometimes we think that there's a sort of thought out there that, okay, you get the psychologists and they're going to have the solution to a sin problem.
Yeah.
But the psychologists can't change.
Or money, if we just throw enough money at it.
Oh, yeah.
And that we found out that doesn't fix it. Famously, this last couple of years, the city of Los Angeles, I mentioned this to you off camera, but a few years ago, we as a county decided that we were going to increase our sales tax 0.5% in the whole county.
Yeah. So for people at home, that's VAT, value added tax. So
which raises about $250 million a year to address the homeless situation.
Yes.
So Los Angeles has been, it's broken, their system. All they're doing is throwing money, and they built 1,100 condos in Los Angeles downtown.
What's a condo?
It's like a townhouse.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a small, like an apartment.
Yeah.
1,100 of these for the price of around $700,000 each. Now we put billions. We spend so much money on these things that don't make a change in the life.
Yeah.
And so they're not seeing any change. They're not seeing anything get better. And really, it's the church that is the ones that are making changes with people's lives, because we have the answer for what the sin problem is.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Wood sort of said before as well is the problem. The problem with throwing money at things as well is it creates organisations, and organisations that are designed to help the problem. But of course, the problem is they don't want the problem to go away. Otherwise, their funding goes down.
And then the organization becomes the problem.
Yes.
It becomes a bureaucracy instead of a ministry.
Yeah.
And then it's like, in a way, we don't spend our money or do money this year, we won't get it next year.
Yeah. And they then go and say, they're brought in as expert witnesses to the state, or the county, or the city council, and the politicians then say, look, what is the biggest need? And they'll say is, we need more money. And it just expands and expands and expands.
And we have the highest rate of taxes, sales taxes in the country.
Yeah.
In Southern California, it's at 11.5%.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is in the UK, but 11.5%, that's a lot of money.
It is, yeah.
For sales tax. So you buy a car and 11.5% added to the car, to the price of the car.
It's huge, but it's probably not as big as ours.
Thank you. Make me feel better.
Don't worry. Better. Thank you, Westminster government. Well, here, a wee question, maybe also on that issue as well. If you were Gavin Newsom for a day, what would you do to try and solve the homeless problem?
I would go to the organizations that are having success and try to replicate those models that are working. There's a friend of mine, his name is Ken Kraft, and we went to Bible college together. And he started a ministry called Hope the Mission, and where they help people not only with housing, but help them with life skills, addiction issues, job training, clothes, safety, all kinds of. It's a multifaceted thing, and they're the largest ministry in the nation of their kind. 13 locations in Southern California, 2,600 beds, where they're providing and places for family housing for families that are homeless to transition into the workforce and to normal homing.
So, would you say that
I would invest in them?
Yeah, you'd invest in them. Those who are being seen to be
the ones that are working.
The interesting thing is then, in terms of poverty and challenging poverty, and I think this is sometimes this is a bit controversial, but is all poverty as a result of just external conditions alone?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
No, poverty is it's multifaceted.
Okay.
You can have poverty. What we're finding is people find themselves impoverished because of their family history,
Okay.
Because of health issues,
Sure.
Because they've been displaced. There was one lady I met. She was homeless. We were serving hot meals, and she was 65 years old. And I thought it was unusual and she looked like she was dressed okay. And I asked her, what happened? She said, I came out here to California from the East Coast to help take care of my mother. And so she passed away, and now I don't have any resources anymore, and I can't even afford to go back to my house, on the East Coast of the United States. So being displaced, not having a family network, to like a net to catch people, that's a big part of it. Drugs and addiction are probably the biggest part, and that's the issue that we face with, I would say sin, our brokenness. So it's multifaceted.
Yeah. So there's multiple things that can, I suppose, be in your life that then sort of brings you down, to that position. So if you're obviously born into wealth, and you have and you stay away from drugs, you stay away from gambling, you stay away from alcohol, and you've learned something from your parents about how to manage money, that's going to help. Whereas if the reverse is true, it's going to hinder and keep you in a cycle of poverty.
Yeah.
So family breakdown is one of those factors that can really cause financial and poverty for not just the immediate generation, because both spouses financially are generally worse off, and it can create a cycle of poverty for the next 4 generations and beyond. So and we see it's a major issue in Lancaster. Nearly 30% of households are led by single mothers, and that's far above the national average. How do you speak into that as a pastor?
So yeah, that's moms raising families. Years ago they used to call that a black problem. Mm-hmm. They called it a fatherless generation, where black men were not being responsible and being showing up and being the fathers to their children. It's not a black issue anymore. It's everyone. Yeah. We see that happening in every culture, mm-hmm. where men are abandoning their place. Mm-hmm. So what we're speaking to is trying to have an effective men's ministry, where we build up men, mm-hmm. and strengthen men and teach men what it is to be a man of God, mm-hmm. to be the leader of a home, to be a responsible citizen, but a responsible part of the home. It's a big part of what we do, as far as our discipleship goes, mm-hmm. teaching men. Yeah. So how does that work out? For us, in small groups mostly. Yeah. We have 4 small groups, five mm-hmm. small groups with men that meet different times during the week. So they're different demographic and age groups. We also have a couple times a year, we have special meetings where all the men come in, and we'll do a breakfast or a barbecue, but we'll address an issue that face men, and we'll just speak to that. So I think it's the men that are the key to bringing the family together, mm-hmm. and recognizing, having a willingness to also adopt other, younger men into our lives, mm-hmm. is something that we're seeing happening. So we're creating adoptive fathers, kind of, mm-hmm. situations where father figures, and we're like every summer we go camping in the high Sierras, and we go for like 5 days. So we'll take a group of guys, and we call it Men and Boys Camp. And oddly enough, there are some men with their sons, but there are also men who are just bringing other guys that don't have fathers. Yeah. And we're finding that the relationship building helps these young men. If they have a man in their life, they're more likely to succeed.
Okay. So it's a bit like Timothy and Paul.
Yeah.
And not sort of like a spiritual fatherhood.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you I remember hearing as well that it's not just for fathers, it's not just grandfathers too are coming along, bringing their grandkids along.
Yeah.
So that's also a huge factor, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know. So
we're finding that grandparents are raising their kids a lot of times.
Really? Still?
Because fathers have, abandoned their post.
Yeah.
And they've just failed. So grandparents will step in and fill that gap many times.
I'm also hearing as well, and so not just there, but I think it's happening at home too. The grandparents are stepping in because parents are so busy working. Because like one of the realities of Lancaster, it was funny, we were talking to this girl, and she's a manager in a company. Her husband is also working, and they're struggling to meet the need.
Yeah.
So that couple had sort of said they don't have kids, they can't afford them, that's another discussion in itself. But if you think about that, then what you're finding is there's a lot of families out there that are also saying, right, we need to put our children in childcare, and some are saying, right, grandparents can look after them, and some grandkids are actually being raised by their parents, not because the parents are not trying to raise their family, it's just
the economic reality.
Yeah.
And we're finding that we're seeing it much more often that families are moving in with each other. So you have grandparents, parents, and grandchildren all in the same house.
Yeah.
Much more common.
Yeah.
For a young family with kids to have their own place, you have to have a really good job. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's both husband and wife working.
Yeah.
So to have the grandparents, so I don't think it's that bad. I mean, people are crying a little bit about it because they have to do it, but I think it's a return maybe to, hundreds of years ago how most people lived.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it gives grandparents a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
So, and there's mentoring in that relationship, which I think is a win.
Looking at the men, trying to invest in the men, is that how you encourage families to stay together? So, as a pastor, there's obviously highlights which you're meeting an old saint in the Lord who is just so encouraging. I'm thinking of a couple of people who I know in your church. Those are highlights, but there's obviously the difficult times, and I know for a lot of pastors, trying to keep families together is one of those challenging things. And it looks very differently, but what does biblical reconciliation look like in a family?
You're talking about
when family,
the man and woman are split?
When men and women are in a marriage situation are having real difficulties, communication issues, things like that, and they're maybe at the point, and very often the pastor, let's face it, finds out about this after behaviours have been solidified for years, and it's now at the point of breaking. How do you step into that, and how do you sort of try and bring reconciliation in them?
I think first of all we speak on family issues on a regular basis. Secondly, I think my wife Kay and I, we feel that having a healthy home ourselves is one of the better ways to disciple.
Yeah.
Because living the life, it starts with living the life. And so we have, like for example, how do we have a healthy marriage? How do we model a healthy marriage? We have communication, we have commitment, we have dedicated time to one another. So how we go about we have time off, we take a Sabbath, we rest. I think that's a big deal with families because I was meeting with a family yesterday, a young couple, and they're 7 days a week. And there's no rest, and they're working hard and extra time and trying to make extra, working overtime. to try to get some more money to be able to succeed. And I don't know if that's the answer. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's downsizing, getting rid of the second car, and having a simpler life and doing less.
Yeah.
I think having strong boundaries and in our life is something Americans aren't really fond of. We want more. We want to make more. We want to have more. Very materialistic. So moving away from that model and just focusing on what's really important, I think, is a big answer to health and families.
And I know there's a lot of you guys as well. Before you would take on if you're asked to do a wedding, for instance, with a couple, one who's getting from Ireland, Northern Ireland, I should say Northern Ireland, one from Northern Ireland and one from California, for instance, you would say to them, before you do that, you want to sit down with them and have a course, don't you? Sort of like a premarital course as well, don't you?
It's a discussion. Yeah. The premarital counseling is just a discussion on several topics, which, I'll give you some crazy statistics. Okay. And they're not completely accurate, but they're close. Yeah. So I feel, I stopped counting, but I think we've done about 175 weddings. Okay. Which is a lot. Okay. And of those, I didn't do marriage counseling with about 25 of those. Mm-hmm. They were just friends or family, or I was just, asked at the last second or whatever. And of those that I didn't do marriage counseling, as far as I can figure, it's a national average, about half of those did not make it. Okay. 50% did not make it. Of the other 150 or so, there's only about 20 that didn't make it out of 150. What an amazing difference in the odds. Now, it wasn't the fact that I imparted great wisdom to these couples. It was the fact that they were willing to work on their marriage and do something conversationally with biblical truth. Yeah. And so if you start out that way, you're more likely to continue that way. Yeah. And so as families move forward, that's why I love doing that premarital counseling with couples. Yeah. It gives them a lot greater chance to be successful in their marriage and family. Yeah.
So you think that at the very beginning, it's important to set in place discussion about topics, asking questions that are difficult, asking questions that maybe they haven't even thought about. Yeah. Things like finance,
No, the money thing is one of the bigger things. Yeah. They don't think about it. And they don't talk about sex because their hormones are raging. They think they're going to be fine, so they don't talk about it. They don't talk about money. No way. They don't talk about children, raising children. They don't talk about role expectations. So what's a biblical understanding of my role? How do I treat my spouse? Mm-hmm. So if you open up the doors in those conversations at the beginning, they're more likely to continue on with those conversations as time goes by. Yeah. And they're healthy. Yeah, they make it.
Yeah. And it's funny, the finance one is interesting because I think very often that's the one people, money will be fine. All these things will be fine, as you said, but those are the big things, and those are the things where the rocks could potentially be. Yeah. Whereas I think very often when people sort of get married, they think, I'm going to get the big house, the dream, the dreams become the big things, and then that becomes the obsession. So what are the ingredients that keep a marriage strong? And I suppose we sort of talked about that, but what are the dangers that break them apart? But what are the ingredients you think that keep a marriage strong?
Okay, so in part of the marriage counseling that I do, I talk about the words in the Old and New Testament that describe love. There's 3 words in the Old Testament that describe love and 3 words in the New Testament. Mm-hmm. And they're all different. We have one word for love, and we use it for everything. I love ice cream and I love my wife, but it's different. So if you have these 6 kinds of loves. In the Old Testament, there's a covenant love, which means that you're committed. There is a inclusive love, which means you're family. There is a winning kind of a love, which means I'm pursuing my spouse on a regular basis. I want to win their hearts. In the New Testament, you have, philia. There's a friendship kind of love where you share experience. There's a sexual eros kind of love where you have intimacy. And there's agape, which is sacrificial kind of love. So if you have all 6 of those loves in a marriage working, it's almost guaranteed success. If you just follow what the biblical, model is for relationships with husbands and wives, and pursue those, you're going to have them on different levels. But if you just pursue those 6 kinds of loves, I feel like that's a win.
Well, what are the things then that, as time goes on in a marriage, 10 years on, 20 years on, how do you maintain all 6 loves? Because it's very easy to sort of say, oh sure, those are all going to be there, but different loves are going to wear thin at different times. I think if you're in a healthy environment, you're more likely to continue on with healthy practices. So a healthy environment would be, I tell people this, just as a healthy person, but as a healthy couple, if you have a time where you're feeding your spirit, I call that a devotional time, that's a practice in your life, then you'll be healthy. If you're in a small group somewhere where you meet on a regular basis with other people, and you're speaking and receiving, in a small group where you're getting to know the Lord and know each other, you have a built-in strength. If you're attending, a church where you're getting teaching and you're worshiping and you're developing good relationships with the congregation, and if you're serving, if you're giving your life away, I feel like those 4 things are huge. Devotional life, what was the second one? A small group, having a church that you're a part of, a community of faith, and then serving somehow, giving your life away. And those are decisions based, when I'm talking to families that are struggling, I ask questions like this. How are you giving outside of yourselves? And most couples don't even consider that. They're just so focused on their problem that they can't see. And really, Jesus said it. He said, if you lose your life, you'll find it. If you lose your life for my sake in the gospel, you'll find it. And it's that serving and giving. I mentioned that food ministry, how about at our church. And the funny thing is that food ministry, they'll serve 250 cars. And it takes about 35 adults to do it. Over half of those adults are senior citizens, and they're lifting heavy boxes and bags of groceries, and they're retired, and they're helping with the food ministry. And some people even take off work to make that a part of their monthly schedule. They take off a couple days a month. The people who run the ministry, they have their own business, and they take off. They don't go to work. They don't run their business on those days. So they have a roofing business, and so they just say, we're going to focus on this. And by focusing outward, there's a lot that's sorted out as far as relationship and giving of ourselves is never a losing proposition. So what you would say is, now obviously those things have to be held in balance, because there's some people lose their marriage because they invest so much in
too much.
Stuff. But what you're sort of saying is that when you make a practice of being selfless, that leaks into every area of your life. That is interesting. Well, that I suppose then makes brings us down to the next topic, which is generosity, faithfulness, and giving. Maybe we've answered all the questions.
Sure.
But you do talk about faithfulness, and it's not just in relationships, but how we handle money and resources. So, how do you understand faithfulness in the financial and relational sense? What's faithfulness?
So, for me, it's being a steward of the finances and of the time that God gives us. So, stewarding the resources that we have. I believe in tithing. So, and I know it's interesting because the church has kind of gone through a little bit of a swing away from tithing, like, oh, that's old-fashioned stuff. But there are so many promises about tithing that God speaks, and I understand, oh, that's Old Testament, and there's not much in the New Testament where Jesus talks about tithing. True. But tithing was a principle before Moses, before it was a part of the law. So Abraham tithed, and we know that, sacrificing and giving to God was there, with Cain and Abel even, they were sacrificing and worshiping. So they understood that honoring God with the first fruits of their whatever they had was a principle. I find that people that don't tithe, they're always waiting for things to get better.
Okay.
If I can just get that pay raise, if I can just get, these credit cards paid off, then I'll be a faithful giver.
Yeah.
But I found that never works. It's so rare that actually happens. What happens better is at your first job at McDonald's, when you're making minimum wage and you tithe on your minimum wage job, and it becomes a part of your life. I just feel like that. I was blessed because as a 18-year-old, working in high school and learning to tithe as a young man before I got a career, that was just a part of my life and my wife as well. I'll tell you a funny story. I'm in Bible college and I'm taking a bus to work. I had to get a transfer and I'm waiting at a bus stop. I'll remember it like as good as day. And I was praying, and my prayer was, Lord, would you just give me $50,000? This is in 1982. A lot of money. I said, Lord, I'll tithe on it. He said, and I can't tell you it was an audible voice, but it sounded like the voice of God, and in my spirit it was resounding, well, I just want you to be a good steward of what I give you right now. What I'm giving you right now. And so even though I was tithing, I was challenged by the Lord to go over the tithe. So it's something that Kay and I have done since we were married. So I tell people we don't tithe. Because tithing is the minimum. So we give much more than that. Mm-hmm. And the odd thing is that our income the next year tends to be based on what we gave last year.
No, this isn't a prosperity.
I don't know. I can't say that works for everybody. Yeah. And we don't make a ton of money. No. I mean, we chose to do this in ministry. We make less than the average pastor. We chose that. We don't live in a high income area. Yeah. So we live simply.
Yeah. So there's no private jet. Sean Appleton?
No. And if there ever is, you have the permission to slap me with a wet noodle. No private jet. I do have a 10-year-old pickup truck, which I love. That's my favorite. Tell you what, favorite car ever.
Getting them today, they wouldn't be this. They wouldn't last you 10 years.
Right. So I think for us, the prospect of giving generously has been a part of, not only for Kay and I, watching God take care of our needs, meet our needs. We're not rich, but all our bills are paid. all our bills are paid.
Mm-hmm.
We have a house payment, of course, and the associated costs with that, but everything's paid.
Yeah.
And we've done that with our church as well. So we've decided to be generous, and we tithe as a congregation. Now, we're part of the Foursquare Church, so we give 10% of our general funds to our organization. It's not required. Mm-hmm. We've made a choice. Mm-hmm. We give more than that, actually. And so we give probably another 5% of our income at the church into local ministries and overseas, helping missionaries. We're going to do some wonderful things. We're helping we built a men's home in Ensenada, a men's recovery home, helped build a church there. Now we're just finishing up building an orphanage in Ghana. And we don't have a lot of money in our church. Our church is not rich. We're not wealthy. We don't have. It's embarrassing to say to people that we don't even have a month worth of reserve income, and yet we've done some amazing things because we're stepping out in that generous level of our faith. And when we do that, I believe that God provides for those who are generous. There was a man I knew probably 20 years ago. He was starting a church, just a new church start. And there was about 30 people, and they started in a home, and I asked him how it was going after about a year. And he said, it was going okay. And I said, well, what kind of ministries are you guys doing? What kind of outreach are you doing? He goes, oh, well, we're not doing outreach. We're just doing discipleship. So they're not investing in anything outside of themselves. So 6 months later, the church was closed. I really believe that our church has continued to thrive because we've focused on being generous.
Yeah.
That is, even, Paul mentions the Macedonian churches in the book of Acts, how they gave out of their poverty and they gave out of their need. And that's what the promise in Philippians 4:19, my God will supply all your need according to his riches and glory. That's made in the context of sacrificial giving.
Yeah.
So as a congregation, that's how we live. Yeah. We always have an eye to give and even sacrificially give.
Yeah, that's so important because I think we have this idea that, hoarding, being responsible.
No, it's insecurity. It comes from insecurity.
Look, it's a very Ulster trait. Northern Ireland, we like to save, hoard, and save for a rainy day. I mean, there's a place in Northern Ireland particularly known for this, Ballymena, Ballymoney, but maybe take you there sometime. But we have this idea. Right, and then we can sort of give. It's interesting you said about the tithe, because I take on board what a lot of people say about, yes, the Old Testament and, it's Old Testament law, but the question I would give is, how many people that I know argue against the tithe are giving more? And very often it's an excuse then just to not give. Yeah. And I think when you're saying we don't tithe, we're giving more than that's right, because it's to be. God is generous.
It's a principle.
Yeah, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. He doesn't need money. Yeah, but He chooses to. He gives us that ability, as you say, steward, and then release. And when we're generous, we are ourselves becoming like God and like Christ in that sense. We're becoming more like Christ, aren't we?
Exactly. I think some of your listeners might be familiar with Jack Hayford. He was a prominent pastor here in Southern California and worldwide ministry. And when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about the prosperity gospel. No. The get rich thing. I'm giving so God can bless me and make me rich. I think that's heresy, actually. Yeah. But Jack Hayford wrote a book, and the book was called The Secret to Everything. Yeah. It was a book on giving and on generosity. There's something about it. There's a Foursquare church up in Washington, outside of Seattle, and they have friends of ours were on staff there, and I asked them how they navigate finances and how do they do missions, and he said, well, we give a third of our budget to missions, and we're fully sponsoring a Bible college in the Philippines.
Wow.
And I thought, I want our church to be like that when we grow up. That's a mature church. That's an outward-oriented focus, and I think that's attractive, actually, when you're a part of a congregation that is selflessly giving. Mm-hmm. I want to be, we just are finishing up this orphanage in Ghana, and it's not a huge building. It's a couple thousand square feet.
Yeah.
It's pennies on the dollar as far as paying for a building in the United States. But we're not quite done yet. But there's so much need there that the kids have already moved in. There's house moms and dads. Yeah. There's 4 adults and 55 kids living in this orphanage. And then they're also going to school during the day. 120 kids going to school. Well, how is it that we as a congregation, and we're the main supporters for that ministry, how is it that we don't have a lot of money, how did we help them do this? And it was, over the last 4 years, I would say about $80,000 to build a building with everything, drill it well, bathrooms, buy the property, the whole thing. How is it that we did that? And I can't tell you how. I don't see it in the budget. It's not a budget issue I can figure out. But when we're looking, you mentioned, the character of God. I think when we do the works and the will of God, that's when you develop the character of God. Mm-hmm. When you follow the heart of God, that's when you get the power of God. So, you've heard people say God's will, God's bill.
Yeah.
But I say when you follow His will, you invite His power.
Yeah.
And then you get to see that work.
Yeah. But that's interesting. Actually, I think just pushing on to that point, what mistakes do you commonly see people making when it comes to money and giving? Because obviously, I think we're talking about the prosperity gospel. I think there's also a poverty gospel and very often the people who promote that poverty gospel don't live in poverty themselves.
Right.
They sell their book at quite a high.
Yeah.
They sell their book. The millionaires themselves. But you're sort of saying a generosity gospel in a sense that earn as much as you can, be as wise as you can with money, give as much as you can. Almost a bit like, I think that was Wesley's approach.
Wesley, make as much as you can, save as much as you can, give as much as you can.
Yeah, that's right.
Great.
So, as a pastor, and as somebody who lives in a poverty-stricken area, what common mistakes do you see when it comes to money?
The big one is debt.
Debt.
And it's wanting to get what they think everyone else has, living up to some other standard, or becoming, focusing on materialistic things. Yeah. And I did this as very humble young family. I remember, I just want to get a big screen TV. Everyone has one. I had no business buying a big screen TV when my kids were little. I had no business at all. But we did, and we got in debt. It was one of the worst things because you pay twice what it's worth when you add all the interest. I think that seeking after stuff is the main culprit for financial problems. Becoming focused on financial, I had a friend of mine he was a pastor, and he was really successful. He had a little business on the side. Mm-hmm. He had a boat, a motorhome, a sports car, motorcycles, all the stuff. And then he had those for some years, and then he started getting rid of his stuff. And I'm like, hey, what happened to your boat? What happened to your motorcycle? He goes, all that stuff really is wearying. You have to take care of it. You have to insure it. You have to fix it. You have to store it. You have to clean it. It's just terrible. It's wearying. So he went back to a simpler life.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the willingness to go maybe to a simpler life is the answer for most families and finances.
And
be content.
Be content. And for those that maybe are, because this is something that I hadn't never thought about until you sort of, and then other people sort of, and for people then who, okay, you've got yourself out of debt, or maybe you never got yourself into debt, you're generously giving, and you then have this wee bit extra. Do you save it? Do you invest it? What do you do with it?
Yeah. So that's something that people didn't talk to my wife and I when we were young.
Yeah.
They didn't talk to us about investing or retirement or what stewardship looked like. And I remember, I'll give you a good example. There's a friend of mine, he was a broker. He said, Sean, I was a youth pastor. He goes, you need to get an IRA. You have to get an individual, retirement account.
Now, what's IRA? Because IRA here, at home, means something totally different.
It's a retirement program.
Okay.
Where you can invest in now, and then when you're retired in your 60s, you can take it out tax-free.
Okay.
So he said, you have to get this retirement thing going. You have to invest in, you can invest in the stock market and buy some stocks and take it. And I said, I can't, I'm so broke I can't pay attention. So he said, Sean, just do $50 a month. And I said, I don't think I could do it. And he talked me into it. So we did $50 a month. I think we did it for 10 years. Figure that's $600 a year, $6,000 in 10 years. Not a ton of money. And then we stopped. This is when our kids were small. We stopped adding to that account. And we did some other things. But it's funny how by just planning a little bit for yourself.
Yeah.
So today, that number is over $60,000. Yeah. That $6,000 invested 25 years ago is now over $60,000. So basically what Kay and I have been doing is we're just taking small steps to be savers and prepare for our future so that we won't be a burden to anybody when we retire. And that's good stewardship.
Yeah.
I've heard people say, tithe 10% and then save 10%. But then you got to give the government 25%, so I don't know. I've never been able to save 10%, but we are savers and we do invest in the future.
I'm very disappointed that I didn't invest today because Trump had announced invest in stocks, and he said, and then he, a couple of hours later, said he was removing the tariffs.
So here's a secret to stock market.
Follow Trump?
No. Don't look too closely.
Yeah. Don't
watch it. Don't be a day trader.
Yeah.
Look at it seasonally, a couple times a year, and have someone else like an investor or a stock expert to help you and analyze. And you're going to pay them a small amount to look over your funds.
Yeah.
Usually a percentage based on how much you're investing. Yeah. But if you just look at it twice a year and not watch the stock market, unless you're a certain trader. But even then, you're sort of getting to the level of gambling. Whereas, but if you, I think, I have a couple of friends who do this seriously. What they have it down to science. They look at companies, they read the reports, and they know exactly what they're doing. But they think about things of value potentially in the future. But again, you have to know what you're doing before you start doing that. But it is that thing of a little bit of a time creates a lot. I don't know if you have it in the UK, but Dave Ramsey is a big influence as far as the helping people in discipleship and finances here in the States. Have you guys heard of Dave Ramsey?
I have heard of Dave Ramsey, yes.
So there's several million people that have gone through his course. It's called Financial Peace. For Kay and I, about 15, 16 years ago, we took a class, a course with him in 9 weeks, and it transformed the way we looked at money. Yeah. It was good biblical teaching. I can't recommend something like that enough. Going through a system where you're receiving instruction, understanding about whether it's, the big thing was debt, getting out of debt, how important that was, and then creating your own emergency fund. You called it the rainy day fund. That's funny. We have one of those too in our house, but emergency fund. And so it's dedicated for emergencies. I remember I called Sears to cancel my Sears credit card. Now this is 15 years ago, and I didn't even have anything on it. And the lady on the other side said, "Why would you cancel it when you could use it in case of an emergency?" And I said, "Well, because I just took this class with Dave Ramsey, and we actually have an emergency fund. We have $1,000 saved, and it's for emergencies." She said, "That's a great idea." She's trying to talk me into keeping the card. And then when I told her, about having my own emergency fund, she's like, "Yeah."
Well, look, Sean, thank you so much. It's been incredible hearing your story, incredible hearing your insights into poverty, finance, and family. Before we close, what would you say to pastors and believers who are feeling worn down ministering in hard places?
Well, Isaiah says, those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. So I think we can't get away from that personal refreshing that comes from the presence of God. So that's honestly my go-to, is just having that devotion time, having that talking time with the Lord. If you're in ministry, taking time actually away from ministry. You call it a Sabbath or a sabbatical, or just a vacation. Important. And I've found that, and when Kay and I take some time off, usually if it's a week or two, and sometimes we've taken a whole month off, and some people are saying that can never happen, and I know I was there for 20 plus years. That could never happen. And when we did, generally we found out the church improved. People in the church picked up the slack, and they got more involved, and people responded better. The church was better when we came back. So don't be afraid to take time off.
Okay. Well, look, thank you again, Pastor Sean. If listeners want to connect with you or find out more about the work of Hope Chapel, how can they do that?
HopeForAV.com is where we are on the internet, and Hope AV is where we are on YouTube. So they can watch our services, find out a little bit about us.
Okay, brilliant. And thanks once again for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
It's honestly, and it's been good to catch up with you. And to all our listeners, until next time, keep advancing Christ's kingdom in every domain and moving forward with truth. Thank you.